Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the PFF Summit 2021 session, Legislative Advocacy, How You Can Help the PFF Lead the Way. We're so happy that you've joined us today so that we can learn together more about the PFF's advocacy efforts and how you can make a difference in the lives of patients with pulmonary fibrosis. My name is Kate Gates. I am the Vice President of Advocacy and Programs with the Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation. At the foundation, I work closely with Bill Schmidt, who is the foundation's president and CEO on our government affairs program. Bill is going to be the speaker today for this session on legislative advocacy. In addition to leading the foundation's government affairs program, Bill also has a background in advocacy. He started out his career on Capitol Hill, and he has experience working with health research policy advocacy. So he's going to be a great speaker today. He has a lot of great information to share. We'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. So please do go to that question box and be putting in questions as we go so that we can address those at the end. Thank you again for joining us, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Bill.
Welcome, everyone, to this session on our legislative advocacy efforts at the Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation. My name is Bill Schmidt, and I'm President and CEO of the PFF. Before I begin, I want to share with you that I began my career working for a member of Congress too long ago to admit, I have to say. After that, I spent about 15 years lobbying on medical research related issues for a number of nonprofit health organizations. So I have experienced firsthand the enormous difference legislative advocacy can make in the lives of patients. Policymakers are frequently making decisions that can have a profound impact in the everyday world. So I want to begin with an introduction to advocacy, and today I will be talking about legislative advocacy. So what exactly do we mean by legislative advocacy? I will be talking about advocacy that involves communicating with public officials about policies and topics that are important to patients with PF in the entire PF community. Public officials can be elected officials like members of Congress, members of the House, members of the Senate. They can also be unelected or appointed officials like the director of the National Institutes of Health, the director of the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, or the administrator of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Staff that work for members of Congress or federal agencies are also very important in our efforts. Congressional staff often provide pivotal advice to the member of Congress on how to vote and are often the people you will meet with. Our advocacy efforts at the PFF focus pretty much exclusively on the federal government in Washington, D.C. It's where most issues having the biggest impact on patients with pulmonary fibrosis are decided, and we simply don't have the bandwidth to track 50 state legislatures effectively. On occasion, though, if an important issue arises at the state level, we will lend the PFF name to group advocacy efforts. So why is advocacy so important? Well, as I mentioned before, many decisions are made annually in DC that directly affect the lives of patients with pulmonary fibrosis and their caregivers. If we don't track these issues and take action when needed, nobody else is going to be raising awareness of the needs of the PF community. So why is advocacy important? More specifically, advocacy is essential to ensuring that public support for PF-related research is strong and growing. As we will discuss, there are two very important federal sources of support for PF medical research. The PFF also weighs in on issues related to the quality of care being provided to PF patients in particular by the Medicare program. More on this in a few minutes. So I'm going to spend the next few minutes really talking about our priority of increasing funding for pulmonary fibrosis related research. So the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, is the single largest public funder of medical research in the world. The NIH is composed of 27 institutes and centers focused on different diseases and areas of research. The public investment in NIH has paid dividends over time. Many of the ideas generated by NIH-funded research have led to breakthrough medical treatments over the years. Most recently, the early work on the technology behind the Pfizer and Moderna COVID-19 vaccines was funded by the NIH. The NIH is located just outside Washington, D.C. on a campus in Bethesda, Maryland. But about 80% of NIH funding flows to universities and academic health centers all around the country. The nice thing is that there is, and there really has been for quite some time, strong bipartisan support for the National Institutes of Health. At a time when there's little agreement on much of anything in our political system, this is important and very encouraging for our efforts. The FY 2021 budget for NIH was $43 billion. And this year, the US House of Representatives has passed a proposed budget that has increased that to $49 billion. So within the vast expanse of the NIH, the most important institute for pulmonary fibrosis related research is supported by the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. NHLBI, as it's called, is one of the largest institutes, and it provides the vast majority of funding for PF-related research. There's also some research funded through the National Institutes of Aging, but that's a very limited amount compared to the NHLBI. Some examples of research funding through the NHLBI: genetic risk factors for pulmonary fibrosis, methods for diagnosing pulmonary fibrosis, treatments for pulmonary fibrosis, and many, many more areas of research. So I wanted to talk a little bit about a very important study currently being funded by the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute that's referred to as the Precision Study. This is one of the largest single grants for pulmonary fibrosis research ever from the NHLBI, and is funded jointly by that institute and our PFF partner, Three Lakes Foundation, located in Chicago. This is the first clinical trial to apply the principles of precision medicine to the treatment of patients with idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. The trial aims to determine if a readily available compound called NAC is an effective treatment in a subset of IPF patients who carry a particular genetic variant. The trial will enroll 200 patients from approximately 20 PFF Care Center network sites. Initial recruitment into the study is being facilitated by looking at data from patients that are enrolled in the PFF registry. We are very proud of the fact that the PFF registry is a centerpiece of this groundbreaking study. And it's a great example of public and private funding coming together for very important and relevant research. So how do we advocate for more PF research at NIH and NHLBI? After all, research into many other diseases is also funded at the NIH and NHLBI. So we really have to make the case for more PF-related research. One of the ways in which we do this is through so-called report language. So each year, Congress determines the budget for the NIH and NHLBI. And a report accompanies that funding bill and highlights Congress's priorities for the bill. This report is technically non-binding, but the NIH and other agencies pay very close attention to it because they're so reliant on Congress for funding. They want to know what congressional priorities are. So each year, PFF requests that Congress include language about the importance of PF research. PF report language has been included annually the past few years, and I'm pleased to say the House of Representatives has included it in their report this year, and we're working to make sure the Senate does the same. Another very important source of PF research is funded at the Department of Defense, believe it or not. They have a program called the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program, and it's a program within the Department of Defense that focuses on high risk, high reward research. Pulmonary fibrosis, fortunately, has been an eligible topic through the peer-reviewed medical research program, which is part of the congressionally directed program that I mentioned previously. And it's been an eligible topic since about 2015. And each year we work to make sure pulmonary fibrosis remains an eligible research topic in this program. Because in 2019, $17.3 million was awarded for pulmonary fibrosis related research. And that is not a trivial amount of money, I think you'll agree. So each year, we also alert the PF research community to this important opportunity for funding, because if the Department of Defense does not receive high quality proposals from the PF community, PF related research is not going to get funded. As part of our advocacy efforts for this program, the PFF and it's my colleague Kate Gates and her team have identified consumer reviewers for these grant reviews. DoD, Department of Defense, includes consumer reviewers in the process for review of applications. Consumer reviewers are people living with the disease, they're caregivers or people who have had the disease in the past, i.e. Transplant recipients. This is a unique opportunity for patients and family members to have direct input into funding for research. It takes about 30 plus hours of work we found to review a very large amount of scientific information, but we are deeply indebted and appreciative of the PFF volunteers who have stepped up and participated in these reviews. It's really very important to our advocacy efforts. Now I want to turn our attention to an important quality of care issue that we know is a major problem for PF patients and their caregivers. Access to supplemental oxygen under the Medicare program is the #1 complaint we hear about at the foundation from patients and caregivers. Approximately half of supplemental oxygen users report problems with their supplemental oxygen. I think we can all agree that's a lot, and that's totally unacceptable. So there are clearly problems. This is data that was compiled for a peer-reviewed ATS, American Thoracic Society article that was published a number of years ago. But this basic data has also been confirmed by our own internal surveys at the PFF of the PF community. So there are many problems here. Service quality, difficulty traveling, and unreliable equipment seem to be the biggest concerns that we hear about. Patients who need high flow oxygen are often the most vulnerable. Currently, many areas of the country do not have any liquid oxygen suppliers, even though liquid oxygen is part of the Medicare benefit and should be provided. Liquid oxygen is an important form of oxygen for people who need high flow oxygen and also want to remain mobile. Many of these problems are linked to the cuts to reimbursement that were implemented through the Medicare's so-called competitive bidding program, which started about 10 years ago. Overall supply of oxygen is also really stretched right now due to the impacts of increased demand for oxygen for COVID-19 patients. So that's just adding to this litany of problems at the moment. So we continue to work with advocacy partners such as the American Thoracic Society and the American Association for Respiratory Care and others on supplemental oxygen issues. We meet with and communicate with public officials, exploring policy options that would improve patients' access to oxygen. During the pandemic, it was actually right at the beginning of the pandemic, the PFF led an effort to secure waivers for in-person visit requirements for certification and recertification of the oxygen benefit. Seems like a no-brainer, I'm sure, but until we really focused on the issue and mobilized some other groups, there had been no waivers granted for these requirements. We've also produced an educational piece outlining the rights of Medicare patients who use supplemental oxygen. Examples of such rights include the right to get the type of oxygen equipment that your doctor prescribes, the right to have equipment that actually works. We hear terrible stories even about that. The right to file a complaint. And our brochure also includes instructions for various ways to file a complaint with Medicare. So to see the full brochure, you can go to pulmonaryfibrosis.org/education or call our help center at 844-825-5733 to order copies of this brochure. Another priority issue for our advocacy work is access to pulmonary rehabilitation. So, we know the potential benefits of pulmonary rehabilitation, improved physical function, reduced breathlessness, and improved mood and quality of life. Collaboration and coalition building is a key to success in influencing policy and legislation. Key partners for the PFF on this issue include the American Association for Respiratory Care and AAC VPR, the two organizations that we discussed that work with respiratory therapists, the American Thoracic Society, and CHEST, two organizations that work with pulmonologists, as well as other patient advocacy organizations like the COPD Foundation and the Pulmonary Hypertension Association. Areas of focus include PFF's key issues like oxygen and pulmonary rehabilitation. We also collaborate with these groups on other issues as they arise, such as telehealth, for example. Another way in which we advocate is by having meetings with key public officials. For example, we regularly communicate with the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, as well as the team that oversees the medical research programs at the Department of Defense that I mentioned before. Another example is the director of the entire National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute will be a keynote speaker at our upcoming PFF Summit. We're really happy about that and look forward to hearing what he has to say. We and our wonderful volunteer advocates also meet with members of Congress and their staffs, and I'll get into that in a second. So we've been conducting an annual Hill Day for the past couple of years. This is an opportunity for PFF advocates to meet with members of Congress to advocate on behalf of the community. We had a highly successful 2021 Hill Day despite the pandemic. It was held on March 10th earlier this year. More people were able to participate because the meetings were all virtual. We had over 60 PFF advocates participate, which is just terrific. And they held virtual meetings with over 100 congressional offices. That's more congressional offices than we've ever been able to reach during previous Hill Days. The efforts of these advocates were, received press coverage in the Idaho press, the Central Virginian, and the Press Herald, which is based in Portland, Maine. Our specific requests or asks during these meetings were inclusion of National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute report language, which I talked about earlier, and designation of pulmonary fibrosis as an eligible condition in the Department of Defense medical research program. And coming soon, we're starting to plan a 2022 Hill Day as well. We anticipate that it will also be virtual, but that's okay because it really allows more patients to participate. And I know many people appreciated that opportunity. It will take place in March of next year. The exact date still to be determined. You can sign up for alerts to find out about the date and have the chance to sign up for that important event. So now I want to shift and just say that we need you and your participation. We really need to continue to build a network of advocates, all across the country. So please sign up to receive alerts. We promise not to inundate you. The best way to get involved is to sign up for alerts, and you can sign up at pulmonaryfibrosis.org/advocacy. By signing up to be an advocate, you'll receive quarterly update emails as well as alerts about events like Hill Day or other trainings. We will send alerts out when there is an urgent call to action and to reach out to your members of Congress, asking you to reach out to your members of Congress. Our online platform makes it really easy to contact your members of Congress. I really wish we had had these wonderful tools about 20 years ago when I was doing a lot of this work. The new tools are really, really helpful. Just enter your contact information, review the message written by the PFF, and then click to send an email to your members of Congress. It's really quite easy. And you can find your members of Congress by using the form at pulmonaryfibrosis.org/advocacy. So I want to shift and talk a little bit about meeting with your member of Congress. Meeting with a member of Congress or their staff is very important. The first step in this process is to contact their office to request a meeting. During the pandemic, meetings are and will continue to be virtual for the time being to protect, obviously, your health and the health of the congressional staff. The office may schedule you to meet with your member of Congress or with a member of their health staff. And I really want to emphasize that meeting with your staff is just as important and useful. Frankly, many times more helpful in terms of really getting things done, to support our issues. You're going to need to be persistent. You may need to call a couple of times and be flexible with the date of your meeting. These are very busy people, both the members and their staff. So for the meeting, you need to determine what your requests or asks will be for your meeting. You need to, go in with a clear plan on what you're asking the member of Congress to do. Our current asks are, number one, support the House-approved NIH budget of $49 billion, which I mentioned a little bit earlier. And the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute budget of roughly $3.9 billion. The second request is to include pulmonary fibrosis, continue to include pulmonary fibrosis as an eligible condition or topic for the peer-reviewed medical research program at the Department of Defense. And before you have your meeting, feel free to email Kate Gates to request the current policy asks for congressional offices, the email is there, advocacy@pulmonaryfibrosis.org, and we'll be able to help you out and are happy to do that. So before the meeting, prepping for the meeting, a few tips. Log in to the meeting a few minutes early. You don't want to be late. And don't be nervous. Members of Congress and their staff, you're going to find, especially for those of you who have not done this before, they really do want to hear from you. You are actual or potential voters, which makes you, in a sense, their bosses. So they really do need to hear from you. And the other thing I always tell people, rest assured, you know a lot more about pulmonary fibrosis than they do. So that should really give you a sense of confidence as you approach these meetings. So start the meeting with a quick introduction. Identify yourself as someone who lives in the district or the state. Ask the person if they know anything about pulmonary fibrosis, and be prepared to give a little bit of background on pulmonary fibrosis. But if I leave you with no other tip on how to do a successful meeting, it's tell your story. At the end of the day, that's what these members and their staff are going to remember. They're not going to remember statistics as much as they're going to remember, your story and the way in which this disease has impacted you and your family. Then you want to make your requests or asks, based on the responses to those requests, really discuss and identify next steps. Thank the staffer, always thank them for their time. They, as I mentioned before, they're very busy people. And you should really plan for a meeting to not last more than probably 15 to 20 minutes. So you do need to keep these meetings going. You need to get to the point, somewhat quickly, although do take time to tell your story, as I mentioned before. But that really is a realistic expectation. You may get lucky and get 30 minutes, but my experience is it's usually 15 to 20 minutes. Try to promote some discussion with the person. Avoid monologues if at all possible. And also, and this is critically important, if you discover that someone you meet with has a personal connection to pulmonary fibrosis, obviously we don't hope for that for anybody, but please note it and let us know. This can be really important information. Just over the last few years, we've met a couple of Hill staff, one of whom is in a really strong position to be able to help us and has, because of a personal family connection to this disease. So that's really useful information for us to have at the PFF as we plan future advocacy activities. And then after the meeting, follow-up is very important. Certainly within 24 hours of your meeting, if at all possible, email them to thank them for their time. This is really all about building relationships, and building relationships really is the key to effective advocacy. We really want to get to know these offices and these staff, and really get to the point where they're asking us for advice and expertise on this particular disease. And again, I just want to reiterate, please let us know if you meet someone with a personal tie to pulmonary fibrosis. So we have opportunities for you to learn more. Visit our website at pulmonaryfibrosis.org/advocacy. You can find your members of Congress. You can learn more about our policy priorities. Please let us know what you think. Please let us know if you think there are other issues that are affecting your lives that you think we need to pay attention to. We're very open to that, to input. And then finally, just a final plea, we really need you in our advocacy efforts. We've really got to build that network of advocates across the country. So really just want to thank you for participating in this session, and hopefully we'll be working with you, to make changes in Washington to benefit patients with pulmonary fibrosis. And now we're going to show you our advocacy video, which is a nice summary of a lot of what I've just talked about. So thank you very much.
I'm Cindy Chandler, and I've been a member of PFF for 9 years. I am an advocate. Right now I'm on the Government Affairs Task Force Committee through PFF, and we're trying to build a group of grassroots advocates throughout the country. The Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation is where you want to start to get your information. And throughout your process of advocacy, they will be there to support you. I became interested in learning about pulmonary fibrosis when my husband was diagnosed. He declined much more rapidly than the doctors expected. He was diagnosed in January, passed away in May. My mother-in-law, when she was about 81 or 82, they diagnosed her with pulmonary fibrosis, and we went through that again. It just solidified for me the need to get more involved. It was a calling, like, okay, somebody's like hitting you in the head saying, get moving. How many more times can I tell you that you need to do something?
You can't imagine the number of people who come into our office with issues ranging from nuclear weapons to Social Security to the internet, etc. But when a family member comes in, a patient comes in and says, Congressman or Congresswoman, I have a disease that's possibly going to claim my life and I need your help. Suddenly it gets real and it gets personal. And finding your voice and making connections with members of Congress, you've elected them, it's their job to listen to you. And you can do this. I always tell people this should not be scary. These are people just like you, they care about you, they care about your family, they need to hear your story.
It sounds overwhelming to do this, but I was lucky enough to have mentors who broke it down for me.
I met you in Washington, and we were supposed to do Hill visits, and you were one of the rookies.
Yep, 2007. I was very petrified of what are we going to do? What are these people going to say? And they said, just relax and tell your story, make your story brief. And it was easier than I thought.
I think my coaching to you is get over it. They're just people like the rest of us.
We would hope that this is the first step. Our hope is that by increasing the awareness of our colleagues here in Congress and of the American public, that we can not only increase awareness of the disease, but begin to work towards actual dedicated funding for this. Pulmonary fibrosis is something I know all too well, and something I've really dedicated much of my life to trying to fight. My father suffered from it and actually died from it, quite literally in my arms. The idea was, how can I get my colleagues in Congress to know about this, and how can we increase federal funding? Relative to other diseases, the support that had been going to pulmonary fibrosis research was very, very low. So I set to work to try to change this. Well, I want to urge my colleagues to support this resolution, and I would urge them to look forward to ways that we can actually do more.
The main purpose of legislative advocacy is to let your legislators know what is needed in the PF community. You don't have to go to Washington. You can be very effective by repeatedly going to your legislators in district, near your home, in your area. I've learned a lot through my mentor. Make it brief, make it one page, make it easy to read, not a lot of information. You want people to understand that we're talking about a person. We're talking about your loved one. It's relationships, 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 and persistence, 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 because you can't be on someone's radar if they don't hear you.
Since we began this effort, the cumulative difference between what the baseline NIH funding had been for pulmonary fibrosis and where it's at now, that difference cumulatively exceeds $200 million. The annual number of PF-related grants has doubled in that 10-year span, and all of that happened directly because of advocacy.
When I think about my years of doing this advocacy, The thing that made the biggest impact on me was when I saw the amount of money that has gone into the NIH specifically for research for pulmonary fibrosis. And then I realized, wow, this is where I want to put my energy.
The more Cindy Chandlers we have, the more of you that we have, the more effective we'll be. This is something you can do, this is something that will make a difference, and this is something that if you do and others do, we will eventually beat this disease.
It's keeping the memory alive. I do this because it's life or death. I have 2 boys and they are my life, and I don't want anything to happen to them.
Hello again, everyone. Bill, thank you so much for a great presentation, a great overview of how we can get involved with advocacy, why it's so important. Some of the differences that we've already seen have been made through pulmonary fibrosis advocacy. So I really appreciate you sharing that information with us. So we're now in a question and answer session. We have some questions that have come in, and we can get to those questions in a second, but I did just want to point out that we currently have on our website, Bill had mentioned during the presentation, you can go to pulmonaryfibrosis.org/advocacy. And there on our website, we have a current call to action. The Senate and House are currently considering funding for the National Institutes of Health for fiscal year 2022. And we want to reach out to our senators and our representatives and ask them to support robust funding for the NIH. As you heard, the NIH provides so much important funding for research for pulmonary fibrosis. And so we want to make sure that in this next fiscal year that they are getting the funding that they need to continue to support that research. So you can go to our website, it's pulmonaryfibrosis.org/advocacy, scroll down to the bottom, and it's super easy. You just put in your information, your contact information. It auto-populates the email, and then you can hit send, and it'll go to your 2 senators as well as your representative. And what we are asking for is $46.4 billion for the NIH in the upcoming fiscal year. You might have seen on our last slide deck that we had talked about 49 billion. The reason for the discrepancy is there is an extra program that may or may not be included in the final number, but what we're really focused on and what we want to ask our members of Congress for is that baseline number of 46.4 billion to make sure that we can continue the research into pulmonary fibrosis, into the diseases like this that's been going on at the NIH. So you'll see on there, it's 46.4 billion for the NIH and 3.867 billion for the NHLBI, which is the institute where most of the pulmonary fibrosis research takes place. So it would be fabulous if you would go to pulmonaryfibrosis.org/advocacy after this session, scroll down to the bottom and send those emails so that we can make sure our members of Congress are hearing from us. So I wanted to go ahead, you all have sent in some great questions, and I wanted to go ahead and start asking some of the questions that we've been getting. One of the questions was about innovation. There's someone asking, seeing that the sort of the tubing and some of the extra equipment that goes with the oxygen isn't really working well, and they're sort of wondering, are we working at all with the DME companies or the manufacturers to talk about the needs of the oxygen patient and make sure that there's innovation happening? Bill, can you speak at all to that?
Sure, happy to. Yeah, at the present time or up until now, we really haven't had a lot of direct discussions with DME providers. However, Kate and I are going to be working on an initiative that's going to launch in the next few months, where we're going to certainly attempt to actively engage the oxygen suppliers and the manufacturers around technology development issues. We think that there's a lot of room for innovation in the delivery of supplemental oxygen, and I believe certainly in the course of those discussions, these kinds of issues will arise, and we'll be sure to engage them on issues like this.
Great, thanks, Bill. Another question that has come up is, so I was just giving the suggestion that go to our website and fill in this information and send this letter. But do you think that form letters, sort of the ones that, we ask everyone to send, have the same amount of attention as maybe an individual letter would receive?
Well, it's a great question. And I think it's important when you do communicate with members of Congress and their staff that you certainly tell your own personal story. That will certainly make the communication unique. But in terms of having common messaging and the rest of it, it's perfectly fine. What offices typically do on the Hill is they really start counting the numbers of communications that they receive on a particular issue, and that is tracked very closely in those offices. So I think it's the system we have set up is an effective one and works well. Great.
And you are able, when you go in on that form letter that we have on our website, you can go in and you can edit it some. There's a form sentence about how it's sort of on behalf of the pulmonary fibrosis community and what is pulmonary fibrosis, but certainly adding in a couple of sentences about your personal story, I think could be really impactful in that scenario. Would you agree?
I totally agree.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always important what people tend to remember when you either meet with them or write to them. They tend to remember the stories more than anything else. And part of this is really just, raising the visibility of pulmonary fibrosis and making more people on Capitol Hill and in the NIH more aware of the importance of PF related research.
Great. You had mentioned the PFF Hill Day. Are you able to tell us a little bit more about what would be the experience of a participant who is joining us for Hill Day in 2022, especially? So we will talk, I think it's important, we can talk about the virtual right now versus, maybe in person in future years, but our virtual Hill Day.
Yeah, so we just had a virtual Hill Day earlier in 2021 and are planning one for 2022, and it was really wonderful. I mean, we were able to reach or have meetings with over 100 offices, which is really terrific. That's really good reach on a day like that. And we provide plenty of training and preparation for people, especially those of you who maybe haven't done this before. And then it's a matter of really providing all the tools that you'll need to have a successful meeting, lots of tips on what to do, what not to do, what to expect, how to follow up. Covered a little bit of that in the talk, but just want to reassure everybody that when we do these Hill Days, we do thorough training for this so that people are completely comfortable with doing this, and we need you all to participate. We've got to build, if you will, that army of advocates to really develop relationships with these offices that make these very, very important decisions.
Yeah, that's a great point, Bill. I think this, like you said, this year's Hill Day was really impactful because we were just able to have so many people meet with their offices. Can you talk a little bit more just about the benefits of meeting with an office versus emailing? Obviously, email has its place, but what are some of the benefits that you get by actually meeting with the office versus just sending an email or maybe calling?
Right. I think the benefit of actual visits, even if they're virtual, is that you're most likely meeting with the healthcare staff person or the person in that office who's responsible for health-related research. And that person is actually going to be communicating to the member of Congress, the senator or the representative, about how they need to vote or how they're going to vote on NIH funding and that kind of thing. So I think the written communications are important, especially if we can generate sufficient numbers. But there's really no substitute for that, person-to-person contact where you really have the opportunity to talk more about your own personal journey with pulmonary fibrosis. We can talk a little bit more about the disease and educate more people. The other thing that we've discovered doing this is you meet staff members in these offices who may have pulmonary fibrosis in their families. And then all of a sudden you've got somebody who's, perhaps willing to go that extra mile to really help advocate our cause with not only that office, but perhaps other offices as well. So I think it's, these Hill Days are very, very important. And it's important that we continue to do them to, develop these relationships. It's like anything else. It's about building, trusting relationships with these folks.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think you're able to do that over Zoom? Is that something that you've seen has happened over Zoom versus, obviously we're not going to be able to actually, bring patients into offices, in the next few months. So is that something that you think there's benefit to being on Zoom?
I think so. I mean, I've been struck by how effective it is. I think it even has some advantages from the Hill staff's perspective. As we've already touched on, it really enables a lot more people, a lot more patients with PF to participate in the process. We heard from a lot of patients who were just, so thrilled that they could, have these meetings from the comfort of their home and safety, of their homes. As I said, we were able to do, 100 visits, versus a smaller number, just because people were able to do it virtually. We know traveling for pulmonary fibrosis patients is a burden, and so I'm hoping actually that there's going to be, a permanent aspect to this ability to meet with Hill staff virtually.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think it's even once you get to DC, when you're actually doing the meetings on Capitol Hill, you don't realize till you're there how much travel there is between offices and what a burden it is to try to get in each office. And they do make them technically accessible, but it's just really hard if you're trying to do more than a couple of meetings to get to them. So I think that for accessibility purposes, it is really great to be able to have this. And we will, at the PFF, I think we'll do all that we can to continue to make it as accessible as possible for people. So we've got a question. You were talking about the PF Fund research for pulmonary fibrosis through the Department of Defense. And do we have any information about pulmonary fibrosis that might appeal to the Department of Defense, right? Might talk about some sort of military connection or something like that. I know that might be a good question for the medical staff too, but is something that you have a brief overview of what we know that talks about military relevance?
Yeah, so this is a very important program for the pulmonary fibrosis community. For the most recent year that we have data, $17 million of support was provided to pulmonary fibrosis researchers. That is not a trivial amount of money, and I think part of the reason for the success of PF in this program is there are ties to military service. War fighters and soldiers who have been, exposed to environmental toxins, abroad and so forth. And there's more and more data mounting on that. I think really is a reason why there is a significant focus within this program on pulmonary fibrosis. We work each year to make sure. So the way the program works is only diseases that are on a list that's established each year are eligible for funding through this program. And so we work each year to make sure that pulmonary fibrosis is an eligible condition. And we'll continue to do so for obvious reasons, because I think we feel like there's potential for even more support from this program.
Yeah, definitely. It's been a great program for us, and there are definitely natural connections there with the military relevance that help establish why we should be in the program. So it's important to have. Another question that we have is about our oxygen advocacy. You had talked a little bit about the innovation efforts, but can you talk a little bit more about like sort of where are we currently at with our oxygen advocacy efforts?
Yeah. So we know access to supplemental oxygen under the Medicare program is very frustrating. It's probably the biggest complaint we hear about at the foundation from patients. And I've noticed that anytime this topic comes up with a group of patients and caregivers in a room, it's very, there's a lot of passionate discussion around it. So Kate and I have spent a lot of time on this over the last few years. I wish we had a solution to the problem that was imminent, but we're working with other advocacy groups within the pulmonary space. So the American Lung Association, American Thoracic Society, AARC, American Association for Respiratory Care, and a number of others, COPD Foundation, to really try to come up with a comprehensive solution to this problem. And we are encouraged at the moment because we believe we're going to be seeing a legislative proposal fairly soon to really address this issue. And we know that liquid oxygen in particular is a problem, and that's a particular problem for the PF patient community because liquid is a source for high flow and still allowing people to be mobile. And we know that in broad swaths of the country, liquid isn't even available anymore, even though it's supposed to be provided under the law. So we're working on that, looking at the possibility of trying to get, in particular, as a first step in this whole process, getting the liquid oxygen benefit pulled out and reimbursed separately. That's being looked at along with a number of other possibilities. So it's a tough issue. It's, you know, this has been a problem for a while now. We're well aware of that, but I don't think it's going to be something solved by one individual group. So we are going to continue to work with all these other groups in the pulmonary space to try to improve things for access to supplemental oxygen.
I also just wanted to point out that Susan Jacobs, who is really involved in this issue, is going to be speaking on Saturday it's a little bit after noon, probably about 12:15 Central here at the summit, about oxygen legislative advocacy. She'll talk sort of about where we've been. She's been with this issue for a long time, so she's going to be able to give a little bit of a history of it and then talk a little bit more about where we're at right now. So I would really encourage people. It's part of the Nursing and Allied Health Network sessions, which anyone can attend Saturday at noon. If you're interested more in specifically oxygen and legislative advocacy, I would encourage you to attend that session.
Yeah, I just want to add there, Susan's been a tremendous leader on this issue for a while now and is extremely knowledgeable. So I highly recommend that session on Saturday to anybody who's interested in this issue.
Mm-hmm, definitely. And before we get to the next one or two more questions for Bill, I just want to mention there are a couple of questions in here specifically about medication assistance programs, people looking for assistance with that. And that is something where we do have some resources that are available right now. And you can contact the PFF Help Center. That's help@pulmonaryfibrosis.org. So if you have questions specifically about getting help with medication assistance, we know that's a big issue, then we would encourage you to reach out to the Help Center. There are also some specific questions about oxygen systems. And again, you can reach out to our Help Center, but also Susan Jacobs, who is, again, very involved in oxygen, is also doing a session tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. She'll be covering oxygen. And then we have someone actually showing the different types of oxygen equipment. And so you'll be able to sort of see a demonstration, which can be hard to see if you have just read about it. So I would really encourage you to attend that session at 10 a.m. tomorrow on supplemental oxygen. One more question. Do we know how many IPF pulmonary fibrosis patients there are by state? It would make sense that we want to be able to go and say there are this many people in your state. Is that something that you think we have good data on at the moment?
Yeah, data on the total incidence of the disease, it's a little hard to come by. I mean, we certainly have estimates, educated estimates, I would say, for the numbers, nationwide. And there's been some evidence, that certain states perhaps have higher incidence than others. But Kate, I know you've had to wrestle with this in the context of our programs and everything. It's an area where we could definitely use more precise, information. So I'm not aware of a state by state accurate, detailed, breakdown.
Yeah, unfortunately, I also am not aware at this point of that resource.
One thing I would say, though, in this context is that, especially when you're meeting with members of Congress and their staff, we do have the ability to break down by state how much PF-related research is being funded by the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, and that can be a useful advocacy tool, just FYI.
Great. Well, Bill, we are just about at time. Thank you again so much for all of the great information that you've provided. We did get a request for the information where you can reach out to Congress. It is pulmonaryfibrosis.org/advocacy. So if you go on our website, it's just our advocacy page. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We've really enjoyed being able to present some of this information to you, and please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Go to our website and reach out to us if you have any follow-up questions. Thank you.
Thank you.